Today on Public Research with Daniel Schwartz, Episode 13. MSNBC columnist and Substack essayist Elad Nehorai on October 7th, the transformation of Twitter, and how Elon Musk became the most dangerous anti-Semite in the world.
For this episode, I had the honor and privilege to talk to Elad Nehorai, who I really think is maybe the best writer on anti-Semitism in America today. I also need to give some important context. The first half of this episode is an interview that we had scheduled a few days after October 7th, but we had planned on discussing Elad's work regarding Twitter. Because of the recent attacks, we ended up focusing on them and the American reactions to them. The second half of the episode, we did focus on Elad's work regarding Twitter and Elon Musk and the roots of extremism. So I just wanted to give that context. Thank you for listening, and now enjoy the wise words of Elad Nehorai. So this is a dark and historic week in Jewish history, the history of Israel, world history, and I'm really honored to be able to talk to one of the wisest writers, in my opinion, Elad Nehorai. During these tragic days, we had a horrific massacre by Hamas in southern Israel. Many old people and children were killed, many abducted. The reaction to it was alarming to many of us, and I wanted to know what people like Elad thought, people like Ben Lorber, Joel Swanson on Twitter. I sort of consider you guys my three. I think you guys are sort of the triumvirate. There's other great people, don't get me wrong, but you guys really get it, I think. Well,
thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I feel honored to be in that group.
But what I like about you is there's a wisdom and there's a kindness and a humanity that I see in the way you approach politics and connecting different communities. So it's such an honor to be able to talk to you at such a dark time. First question is, how are you doing just on a emotional level right now?
Yeah, I mean, as I've been saying to everyone, it's just, I'm doing as well as one can in this moment. I think we're all suffering. We're all having a lot of, pain and difficulty right now. But I also feel, in a sense, I feel very lucky that I feel that unfortunately there's so many people that I know that are going through so much worse. And also I feel very lucky to be in a Jewish community where I feel held up and supported. So I think, in this context, I feel like I'm doing as well as one can.
For me personally, it's been sort of a whirlwind, and things come every day, different fears, different events. Do you have any thoughts on what these days have been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough because, on the one hand, I think people, myself included, really need time to heal and to connect, and to kind of feel our suffering together. But on the other hand, I think that at the same time, because as you say, things are moving so quickly, it's very, very hard to even for the people that want to, and I think there are plenty that don't, the people that wanted to kind of take the time to heal, I think are kind of aware that there's so much going on and so much to talk about and so much on a practical level that needs to be people kind of want to take a moral stand on, that makes it very, very hard. And I think that's not just about our need for healing. I think it's also makes the practical side of things harder, because when we are, not willing to be in touch with our emotions, or are so angry or so hurt, that we're acting reactively, or at least we don't want to feel what we're feeling, I think we tend to not be as, thoughtful as we may need to be in the moment. and as caring to other people as hopefully, we should be. And I think in a moment when we're going to war, and when connecting to other communities is so important, and not, and of course also connecting to each other is so important. I think, these two things can often come into conflict. And so I really am hoping to keep kind of pushing those messages a bit more, because I just think right now, it's unfortunate, and for good reason, that people are feeling like such a darkness that it's very hard to kind of remember all that.
Hey, I've been to northern Israel and Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Have you spent time in any of these communities in the South?
Yeah, I used to do, so my first writing gig was for a website called Chabad.org. It was like in my early stage when I was becoming Hasidic, and I was there for Operation Cast Lead. I was there for a bunch of other things. So when that was going on, Operation Cast Lead was the war in Gaza in 2008. And so number one, I don't know, there were a lot of rockets being shot at the time, like today. And I visited Sderot, like I think twice. I visited before the war and after the war. And so I got to know the community there pretty well. I was kind of there when I went there the second time. There was literally no tax. I was trying to take a bus there. There was no bus going to Sderot, so I took it to like a neighboring city. And then no one in it, like none of the taxis would take me. So I went like I think there was one bus that would go once a day that would usually take soldiers, and I joined that one. And so when I came there the second time, and I finally made it over there, it was really a powerful sight, because at that time, there were so many rockets falling and most people were kind of staying indoors. But I went to the center of the town, and what I found really interesting was there's kind of like a group of people that were still hanging out in the like downtown area. And I gave me an opportunity for people to interview, and I got to know them pretty well, and we would just chat, and then a rocket alarm would sound, and we'd go, a lot of the like restaurants and stuff are essentially also bomb shelters. So they would just kind of take me inside, and we'd wait, then we'd come out. We also had, my wife and I had someone that we were close to he's not alive anymore, but he was from that area. So yeah, to me it was it was so personal and so real to see, the sights in Sderot, but I think on the other hand, I don't know, the other hand, but another side of this was also that, I think Sderot is one example in Israel of these kind of towns where you almost expect some level of devastation to happen. Not this, of course, but they were on the very close to the border of Gaza, and it was just kind of known this is a dangerous place. Even during peacetime, rockets would fall there, and so you were always in danger in a sense by visiting there. The town was known for having like widespread PTSD and a lot of other problems, especially with the children. And so, I think when some of us heard this story, we were, of course, devastated, of course, surprised by the extent of it, but I think not surprised that an attack occurred there.
And I assume you probably have met, do you have connections to any of the people who died or
I think like most Jews, I don't have, well, I personally don't have, like, thank God I don't have someone that close to me that died, but like my entire Facebook feed, my friends, my family, or my friends of my family, like all knew people that were affected on some level. I had it was just my face. Someone used the term like their Facebook feed was like an obituary for like a week. And I think that was exactly what my Facebook feed was like. And what it was like to talk to people and to connect with them. You'd never know if you're calling someone and just checking in with them, if they said, what I said, which is like my family's okay, or if, I called another friend who works with Holocaust survivors who live in poverty, which is a big problem in Israel. And he said, half of the people he knew were killed there in that program. And also mentioned, and now he has a translator for his work that lives in Gaza, and he's thank God alive, but he kind of assumes at some point he's feeling very hopeless in terms of what's going to happen with him. So, this stuff is personal to all of us deeply.
The difficulty with this is that now people are dying in Gaza, and there's terrible suffering you can see going on there. So focusing on October 7th to a lot of people seems political, but I don't think it is. Going back to the days after, would you care to remark on just sort of what did you think about the way people were responding? Were you surprised by anything?
Like for like the immediate days afterwards.
Yeah, some of
Yeah.
the tweets that went viral. This Teen Vogue writer wrote what did you think decolonization was supposed to be? Essays,
Mhm.
those types of things. What do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was, of course, disturbing. I think there were two sides to this that I think are not discussed enough. So one is, of course, that there are people who really said and continue to say horrific things about the attack, or at least are unable to, are very sympathetic to, the Palestinian loss of life, but have difficulty seeing Israelis and Israeli civilians as innocent, and thus will not allow themselves to feel what it means when Israeli baby is killed. And I think, of course, that is absolutely heartbreaking. I think there was also another side of this that I think has not been discussed enough, because I think, of course, because people are in such pain, because I think some people might think it's not an excuse, because and because some people are just not paying attention, and also because there's a lot of motivation to paint the entire left and progressive world as anti-Semitic. Now, I think what happened with a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals, was this story was not an instant, and this wasn't like 9/11 where we all saw the horror happen in front of our eyes, and it all happened, while we all saw like the plane hit, and by the time the second plane hit, we all
Right.
knew what was happening, and by the time the buildings fell, we understood exactly what how much, we understood exactly what that meant in terms of loss of life. I think when it first came out, I think depending on how you heard the story, you might have heard first that Gazans broke out of the fence, and then you might have heard about an attack, but not really heard what it meant. And then you would hear about, innocent people being killed, and then you heard about a town being attacked, and then you heard about multiple, and that, it was on and on. And then you heard about the concert, and at a certain point, it became very obvious that this was like a different attack. And I think that on the one hand, I think there's this this is in general the kind of thing that I feel like that I feel like is my mission to change in my work, which is that I think a lot of people have like a templated approach to how they deal with these moments. Meaning, there's been attacks before on Israel. There's been debates about what to do about the attacks. And there are also a lot of consistent positions that people have taken in that regard. So what that means is, when there's an attack, usually there's kind of just like the response template. And I mean that both in like a literal sense, that organizations essentially have a template for how they respond. And then you have an individual, like in your head, kind of a pre-recorded idea of what you're going to say in that moment.
Exactly.
And I think, yeah, and I think that makes sense. It's hard to completely craft a completely new ideology or way of thinking for each attack. But on the other hand, I think in that moment, especially once it started to come out that this was like not a normal attack, I think a lot of people either made a purposeful, they were either made a mistake, or it was irresponsible, or however you want to put it, where they just gave their standard responses, like saying the problem is the occupation, for example, and that kind of thing. And I think that's important in a sense, because they are correct to want to get to like the source of a problem, but I think when we're dealing with that level of terror, when we're dealing with Hamas, when we're dealing with something unprecedented in Israel's history, or maybe not unprecedented, but at least, it's been a very long time since we had anything like that. You having a templated approach is revealed to be as problematic as it sounds. And I think that it can get you only so far. And then in these moments, you really need to take a moment to remember your humanity. And I mean that both for organizations and for individuals. And so what we're seeing now, I think, is an adjustment to that. I think there are a ton more than are given credit. There are a ton of organizations and individuals who have adjusted the way they speak about this and have been thoughtful about how they approach it. And then there's a ton that aren't. And I think that that's really important to highlight. And it's really important to highlight the difference, because when you flatten it into, the left is all like this or whatever, you destroy, really a group of people that are committed to justice for all people. And I think that building a better world requires a lot of solidarity, requires a lot of connection with other groups. And these moments make it way too easy to forget that, and way too easy to think my only safety is my own people. And it's, again, understandable, but it's not sustainable. I mean, the way this, one of the reasons that this happened, or that it happened as bad as it did, I should say, was that a government in charge of protecting Israelis was so obsessed with this idea that we need to protect ourselves at all costs, that it, metastasized into a bigger problem, where they believed they were not just in charge of protecting themselves, they were in charge of anyone that would dare challenge them. They're in charge of the borders, they're in charge of the entire Judean area, and on and on and on. And what that turned into was such an obsessive way of thinking. It was such a fanatical way of thinking, that so many resources were put into oppressing Palestinians in the West Bank, that there were literally no, or very few, definitely not anything worth talking about in terms of army and police to protect the Israelis in the South. I mean, this was a direct thing. This is, and Israelis have been very, very public about this problem. And the liberal Israelis in particular have been very vocal about this. And so my point is that there's something deeper going on, where it's not just about the fact that, we should be in solidarity with others because it's the right thing. It's the fact that you can see in Israel, even in an entire country built on the ideology that you need to protect your own, cannot protect its own while also being fully invested in others. Israel depends on America, depends on allies. This is not this mythology that we can live on our own and protect our own is just that. And it's just not sustainable. It's not a strategic way of approaching the world, let alone a moral one.
So I'm Reformed Jewish. Very different world from Chabad. That wasn't my world of Judaism. What did you grow up as yourself?
I grew up with kind of probably the best way of putting it would be secular Israeli, meaning my parents were Israeli. They were secular. So what that means is a very, very strong cultural identity with Judaism, as well as more amount of knowledge than probably the average American, but definitely not religious.
Okay, gotcha. And then you became Orthodox. You joined Chabad, and then you left Chabad, right? I think.
Yeah. So I joined Chabad I started going to Chabad in college, a Chabad house, which is different than being part of Chabad. And then after that, I went to Israel. I studied there for a bit. That was also when I started my writing over there for Chabad.org. I became, at that point, pretty committed to being Chabad. Got married shortly after that, then again moved to Israel, then came back to America. And in America, I lived in Brooklyn in Crown Heights, which is really like the center of Chabad. And at that time, I became, that was kind of like the most committed I was. So it was also when I was the most integrated into the Chabad community and Hasidic community there. I lived there for about 10 years. And towards the end of that was when I left Chabad, then I left. And then when we moved away from there was when I left Orthodoxy as a whole.
So the day of October 7th, it's one of those days like I think I'm going to remember for a while. I was in a group chat on Twitter, and they're pretty much, I think most of them are sort of Marxist, socialist, and I don't think they're anti-Semitic. I know some of them are Jewish. They're Jewish anti-Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started seeing the pictures of the old women gunned down at the bus station, clearly civilians, and the videos of the families being held hostage. It was just horrible, horrible scenes of children. I don't need to get into that.
Mm-hmm.
In this group chat, one member who is Jewish himself, but anti-Zionist, said "Glory to the heroes" today or something, and they were really celebrating. And I'm sort of a contrarian. I couldn't help myself, and I was emotional, and so I posted a picture of the dead women at the bus shelter, and I said, in quotes, "Glory to the heroes?" ? And they came in. They basically told me there are no Israeli civilians. And this is actually, we heard there's a big YouTuber named JT Chapman who goes by Second Thought. He said there are no Israeli civilians. There's settler oppressors.
Mohammed Zaman sent $5. Thank you very much. He says, "Did the Palestinians actually take civilian hostage, or is that fake news?" I don't care.
Yeah, the occupiers are not civilians. That is what it comes down to. Like, imagine if
Sorry, go on.
Germany, let's say Germany, to be non-controversial, invaded the United States, and they said, you know what, Cincinnati, Ohio is our ancestral home, and everyone knows that's blatantly false, but they take your home, they murder your grandma, they bulldoze like your neighbor's house. Are those people civilians there? No, they're occupiers, and those are criminals. There are no civilians there in the illegal military occupation.
You know this subject better than me, but I was not prepared for that. I didn't know that was a thing, so I was really shocked for many days by that. I think you're wiser than me. I'm sort of the dumb guy who just reacts with my gut. So I was just angry about that. But I'm sure you saw that stuff. How did you feel about that particular line of reasoning?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably, legalistic arguments you could make, or technical arguments. Like, for example, that would require believing that all of Israel, every single person in Israel is a settler. Obviously, I think there's plenty of people that have maybe some logical arguments for why that's the case. And then, but you could also argue, well, that's not the West Bank. This was in Israel proper. But I think ultimately, I don't think that debating that is productive, because I think really what it is if you think that an elderly Holocaust survivor, or a baby, or a child, or any of those people that were killed, if you think that a child being tortured in front of the parents, or the parents being tortured in front of the kids, and on and on, we can go into a million examples. If you think that that is legitimate, there's really nothing, we have nothing to talk about. Meaning, that's what I would say to them, and then I wouldn't debate them anymore, because it's we're just in a different universe of morality at that point. And I would try more to appeal to the people that are willing to listen, because I think really, I think part of this is, we can talk about worldviews and talk about beliefs, but I think part of it is also we're starting to see, to an extent, a separation between people that are willing and open to, feeling their humanity and allowing that to be part of what guides them, and then hardcore ideology where you are so committed to a certain line of thinking that you literally cannot feel or listen to your own humanity, and thus have trouble rethinking your positions. You have trouble being honest about your own positions and your own failures, and et cetera. And I think in America and everywhere in the world, we're facing that in multiple directions. Again, I do feel like the issue is maybe overblown on the left, but I also think that because a lot of people are not willing to acknowledge it or not willing to kick out or call out people that do it, the problem continues and persists.
I know for a fact that obviously David Duke is one example. People use Zionists as a euphemism for Jews. We know that there are anti-Semites who call themselves anti-Zionists, but I don't think it's as simple as anti-Semitism with a lot of these people. Like, I think it's sort of more of a political thing. Marxists were very, pro like hijacking and anti-Israeli terrorism. And so like we sort of see that strain of kind of Marxism today where they just really hate Israel. But for some of them, they just think Israel is evil, but they're not anti-Semitic. Sometimes that is the case, I believe. Sometimes clearly not. So Israel-Palestine is the issue I sort of agonize with the most. I could argue both sides. I argue in my own head about it. And I'll give you an example. Have you ever heard of the Rabbi Eric Asherman? He's this guy. He goes to protect West Bank farmers when settlers attack them. And he just stands there. He's been stabbed by settlers many times, trying to defend West Bank olive farmers. He's a heroic guy. And I saw him speak at a friend's house, and it was so powerful.
In the field, we continue to see rampant settler violence that is not checked. The security forces are not willing to lift a finger, practically, to protect Palestinians. Unfortunately, our security forces are giving almost total direct or indirect backing to the settlers as they've been cleansing this entire area of Palestinian presence.
And I've long thought it's a total disgrace that Israel is not arresting these settlers that are just being horrible to, like people trying to harvest their crops and stuff. So that's on one side. On the other side, and I wonder if you agree, the new rhetoric of sort of the younger left, and I really like these people 95% of the time. But the rhetoric has gotten really extreme. You can say apartheid, that's fine, but it is just Israel is pure evil. The Palestinians are pure good. And there's a phrase I'm hearing a lot of the younger people on the left streamers say, and it's amazing, where they say the Israel-Palestine issue actually isn't complicated. It's really simple. And there's a really obvious solution, and the occupation. Which is amazing. So, but it's come to this pretty radical place.
So in this video, I'm going to try and break down how this issue of Israel-Palestine is not complicated.
As millions of people have poured out onto the streets in defense of Palestine, a common retort we're hearing from defenders of Israel has been this: you guys don't actually understand what's going on. This is actually a very complicated conflict. Stop pretending it's black and white. And the intention of complaints like this is really clear. They're intended to get you to ignore the murder that's going on in front of your eyes, because if Israel-Palestine is too complex to grasp, well, you might as well stay at home. You don't want to get anything wrong. It's not complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, number one, I'm trying to think about the best way to respond. I think that there's definitely, a huge problem in that respect. I think it's also it's very clear to me that there's kind of especially in that podcasting universe, there's a lot of contrarian ways of approaching things. And I think saying something like, well, it's actually simple, is kind of a big part of that. I I think it's really important at this point for us to work with allies and for ourselves to be vocal about these problems, about the problems in the rhetoric and the dialogue, because one of the things today I kind of ranted a bit on Twitter about white leftists because I really feel like there's a bunch of people that are like dying to feel like saviors, dying to feel like they're the ones who are going to solve this problem, and dying to feel like they're dying for a simple answer, like, because it would be amazing for them to have that, because for years they tried to ally with Black Lives Matter, and they couldn't really commit perfectly. They tried in this respect, and I think just being anti-Israel without a larger vision of what that means in terms of like, just in terms of Israel, but I think also in terms of humanity, and like your approach to life and your approach to the way you think like conflicts in general should be handled, especially ones like that, like, I think is not something that's been developed in their minds, and I think in a lot of people's minds. And so it's very, very easy to just be anti-Israel without being pro much, except claiming to be pro-Palestinian, and then kind of just going along with the taglines you've heard. And I don't mean to like dismiss every single person that's pro-Palestine or anti-Israel at all, but I do think that for a group of them, there's a lack of introspection, a lack of thought around this that causes them to just want to be holy warriors, and I think that creates a lot of problems.
The phrase that came to mind a lot, seeing the reactions, was "skin in the game."
Mm-hmm.
I started. I'm not going to name names, but like when you're a Lutheran from South Dakota and you're going up to like, and you're saying like, that Holocaust survivor who like went to Israel and now he's old, you're like a Rhodesian, you're like Bull Connor, you're a war criminal, settler, apartheid, denigrating these people. If I was Lutheran and I was like anti-Zionist, I would take pains to say, I know about the Jewish history of pogroms, and I know about this desire for safety, and I understand why it came about, but X, Y, and Z. But I'm just amazed by the amount of times I don't even see any attempts to empathize. Instead, they depict these people who came from Europe, from displaced person camps, as quasi-Nazis. And it bothers me. It bothers me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is upsetting. I mean, I think there's kind of one of the things that I try to highlight as well is that I think it's important also to separate the skin in the game people, because I think, for example, I have Muslim and Palestinian friends who, the moment the hospital was attacked, blamed Israel for it. And for the record, I still don't know. I personally don't feel like we don't yet have enough trustworthy testimony between either Israel or Palestinians. But I did think anyone rushing to assign blame in that moment was just making a mistake, just like from everything I know about misinformation and stuff, not about Israel Palestine. But when they did that and they were so angry and it upset, so upsetting, I think I didn't feel in any way upset about it, and in general, I don't feel upset if there's sometimes saying something that I feel offended by or hurt by, or might feel hurt by somebody else, because they have skin in the game. Like, they're very scared for the people. They're just like when I see a Jewish person saying something, or an Israeli person, actually more American Jews, saying things that I really think are really problematic at this time. I'm also like, well, these people are grieving, they're in terror. In general, I would disagree with them and want to talk to them about it. I do try to find my ways of talking about it, depending on who they are. But it's also like, we have to be thoughtful and careful about these things. Like, in the same way, meaning to say, in the same way that we're kind of hoping for that for ourselves, from others, we should be kind of expecting that from ourselves, even while we're grieving. Because I think if we can't do that, then I think, on the other hand, it helps me understand why other people have difficulty with empathy. But I think there's a huge mountain of a difference between the people who are suffering and afraid and concerned for their families, and in general have intergenerational trauma around this, have their own trauma around this, and on and on. There's a huge difference between those people who are Muslim and Palestinian and Jewish and Israeli, and like you said, like a white Lutheran from South Dakota or whatever, is massively different. We see that, across the board in America, where so many people treat this stuff like it's a game, or like it's many people have made the analogy to, it seems like some people are treating it like a sport. You put on your team's makeup and outfit and uniform and flag, and you go out there and you think you're on like the right side. And I think for a Palestinian marching or a Muslim person marching, it's massively different to be marching with a flag than for some other people.
Yeah, I'm not going to lecture Palestinians about you shouldn't be angry. Obviously, those people like have legitimate, they have skin in the game, right? As you say, I have a friend from Israel, and he would say to me, it was sort of funny. He'd be like, just imagine from my perspective, I have this hipster in LA come up to me after, people in my family have died for Israel, after this country was created by the UN, after the Holocaust, the Holocaust survivors, many of them dying in the 48 war, and all the sacrifice building this country. And we were told we're a legitimate country. And now it's 2023, and some hipster from LA comes up to me and says, yeah, you're like apartheid evil, and like we just gotta like undo you as a country. Like you're not like legitimate. Like 75 years after the fact. Like, yeah, undo it. And from his perspective, that's so infuriating, because he's like, well, does anyone say Paraguay is not legitimate? But they just get to come up to us and say, yeah, you're not real. And
yeah,
so
I think there's there's multiple ways of looking at this. Like, on the one hand, I do think that solidarity movements are important. And I'm sure that, a lot of the people who are fighting, who have skin in the game for Palestinians are, I'm sure grateful to have people on their side.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think that there's this is why I think like the humanity part of it needs to constantly be re-emphasized, because I think that there are people that are doing it for the right reasons and people doing it for the wrong reasons, and there are people who are doing it without regard to the consequences of how they speak, and then there are people that are doing it with thoughtful approach and are being brought in that way, and there are people that are being used in different ways by multiple different actors. Like just to give an extreme example, is like the far right now, Nick Fuentes and others are strategizing ways to recruit pro-Palestinian supporters to become white nationalists and white supremacists. This is something that is like a real thing. It's not imaginary, and it's common. I mean, I don't know common, but it's widespread enough that it's a problem. And I think that only occurs when there's not like a defense mechanism based on humanity. When you're kind of so enemy focused that you don't have something else. And again, I think that makes us consistently makes us vulnerable to suggestibility. And I think so again, I think I want to be careful not to say like every white leftist who shows solidarity, but I think there is that aspect of like not putting thought or care or humanity into it, or at the very least like a larger vision. And then again, if you think about it in that sense, if you're so enemy focused, so anti-Israel that you don't have another vision, then of course like a white nationalist fascist coming to you could sound attractive, or at least you wouldn't necessarily see the problems, because in the short term you could even ally with them, even if you know the dangers. But most people don't even know the dangers. And that again is like this is a huge danger and problem in the way that we speak in America and elsewhere, where where we become so focused on destroying an enemy that we forget what we're trying to build.
One thing I've noticed, and it's really sad, and it's also boring, is that the sides are not even talking to each other at all. They're not even having the same conversation. And this isn't to say one is wrong or right. So, but basically, you've had during this bombing of Gaza, evacuation, and horrible stuff has been occurring. Don't get me wrong. You have the right saying, look, Hamas is like ISIS and they need to be destroyed. And then you have the left saying this is genocide. And they're not even communicating. So right wingers would ask, oh, what are we supposed to do? Just send a letter, you know? And I would be interested in hearing that discussion, but I'm not seeing it anywhere, which is really, it's sad, especially because it's boring. And, you know, I view myself as ignorant. I view myself as a learner. I don't think I've read enough books on the subject to tell people exactly what the right thing is. So I'm trying to learn. Like when people say we need an immediate end to the occupation, I'm trying to figure out right now, like, does end of occupation mean that the Gazan ports can import any amount of Iranian weapons with no filtering? Is that like a core part of end of occupation? I'm trying to get past these slogans, and it's just everybody likes the slogans. Nobody likes these details, and it's just very sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is sad. I mean, I think it's yeah, and I think we're just not gonna we're going we're gonna go in circles with people like that. And I think that this is why I try and just kind of focus on like continuously thinking about how do I explain like the forward thinking approach to things, because I think like, you know, and I think it's true, I have a lot more, like for example, when I go on Facebook, it's a lot of the friends I had back in the day, when I was more like overtly pro-Israel and different things. And so on my end, I see a lot of things that disturb me from there. People who are consider themselves liberal and sharing like Ben Shapiro and stuff like that. And or people even calling for, carpet bombing of Gaza and that kind of thing. And, I think that the seduction of social media is to think that if I get into this argument with this person, I've done something productive. And sometimes it's true. I mean, like I obviously argue to an extent with people online, like, but I usually, even then, I'm kind of doing it as like kind of using it as an example as opposed to like just digging into them. Unless it's like a neo-Nazi, then I just mess with them. But even then, I'm also doing it to kind of like make an example of like, you can't just come after Jews without us responding, that kind of thing. And my point is more like what's productive in these situations, and I think that there's a lot happening in the world that allows us to continuously go in loops with people that we shouldn't be going into loops with, because it drains us of our energy. It hurts our own thinking because we tend to be kind of see them as a massive problem, and then they might be, and we definitely have to address it in some way, but we become like kind of hyper focused on them, I should say. And I think like we need to constantly be like taking a step back, and then jumping in the places where we belong. And that's been like a constant learning process for me. I think for most people that use the internet because or social media, because this is still new in so many ways, even though it's now like 2 decades old. It's constantly evolving, constantly changing. So as a marketer, I find it to be an interesting exercise. Like, how do I use social media in a way that's not just draining me of my energy? And I think unfortunately, I think moments like this, social media is always unhealthy in general, especially if people don't know how to use it. But moments like this, can be traumatic, or at the very least can just drain us of any energy for anything else. And we need to take care of ourselves, and we also need to like think, if I do want to help, how can I help the best?
Everybody laughs at the two-state solution. I know that I'm one of those two-state solution people, and you can laugh at me. But it seems striking that the further we go away from that, even the dream of that, the less people discuss details, like, okay, so how are we going to solve this? How are we going to have a port system where the Israelis don't think, we're not going to let the Hamas import a nuclear bomb from Iran. The further we get into slogans, black and white, one side is totally evil, one side is totally good, and the terror attacks destroy trust, and we just get further and further away. And I understand Israelis they'll say, we had no one to negotiate with. I get it. But I've always believed they should just been caught trying. They just should have kept trying. And we're just moving
Yeah, I
in
mean,
an
I think
impossible direction. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that what we're seeing now, and this is like what's hard to help people understand, in my opinion, is that as horrifying as this was, it can get worse. And the reason that I'm saying that is because, this approach to like, we're going to keep protecting ourselves, we're going to keep pretending like a group of people isn't there until we have to like mow them down when they cause us problems and that kind of thing. That approach has literally like overnight been proven to be ineffectual, not just immoral, but it's ineffectual, and that's kind of where I started early when we first spoke. Like,
Right.
this is not just about, what's the right thing to do. The reason that one of the reasons it's the right thing to do is because humans are inherently have worth and individuality. And what that means is that when you try to pretend like they don't exist, they don't stop existing. They keep changing, they keep growing, they keep adapting, and you can pretend like they're not there, but they will still be there. And so, this is kind of the idea behind ethnic cleansing, is like when you decide that you're no longer going to just tolerate someone's existence, you're going to literally put this kind of thinking into action. And genocide, these are kind of like the ultimate results. So the point being that it is not sustainable to keep living like that, and it's only going to result in more of this and worse. The more it continues, it's just going to get worse. And I think that this is like a Western mindset that continuously is brought up. We pretend like climate change isn't there. We pretend like authoritarianism is not on the verge of taking over America. We pretend like white nationalists aren't growing. We pretend like Palestine, this is true in America in particular. It's obviously in this particular context, it's true for Israel. And it's also true for America in the sense of thinking that we can just keep going on without caring about what's happening over there. So I think that, I think that one of the things I hope people take away from this is not, they keep saying, well, we need to stop this once and for all. You're not going to stop it once and for all by doing this. It's going to maybe stop it temporarily. You may hurt Hamas specifically, but like there's rarely a case of when terrorism itself has been stopped. One of the examples was in Syria, I think another one in Sri Lanka, I think. And both of these, they were fighting. Syria itself, was terroristic in how it dealt with and its how it was being run. But really, in both of those cases, the only way they were able to truly fight back was to essentially completely create so much devastation that there was like essentially nothing left to fight back with. And that's kind of the gamble. Are they going to do that? Is Israel capable of that? Morally speaking, I think is a question. I mean, obviously they're to a certain extent going in that direction. But I think for the people witnessing it, I think this is kind of the moral and intellectual reality they need to grapple with, because we can't just, I think I heard a line from a Israeli politician, and I think he's a senior military official. He said, war is just a continuation of a non-policy. And I think the problem is war doesn't sound like that. War sounds like you're doing something. Obviously, you are doing something. But in terms of like a strategic approach, an approach that stops these things in the long term and in the big picture, and in a way that you're not going to have to consistently return to it, it's not a solution.
It can be a sugar high, sort of.
Yeah, for sure. And it's for people who are suffering, it sounds good, especially when they are so rightfully angry and desiring vengeance,
And I'll just say this. I wonder what you think. I have this horrible feeling in my stomach where like Israel fought 3 of these wars, 48, 67, 73. They miraculously won them. And they sort of, there's that arrogance of the winning streak. We're always going to win. And you got Iran who has been building up these forces all over Syria and Lebanon on the border with God knows what weapons. And I think if they go into Gaza, we could really have sort of that Yom Kippur too. And hopefully that does not come to pass.
And now, our second interview with Elad, recorded over a month later.
So we're going to talk about Twitter today, Elon Musk and your X Out hate campaign. But before we get to the campaign, why don't we talk about, when did you start using Twitter?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I probably joined like, I don't know, probably more than 10 years ago, but I didn't really start using it seriously until probably like 2016, 2017, because maybe 2017, because I had actually it was interesting because I had a relatively big following on Facebook, and the discourse at the time was getting so difficult for me because I was so upset with a lot of things. I was in my Orthodox community, and so I would get a lot of pushback from kind of people I knew, from friends and whatever that lived in my community. And it was just very painful, because I was hearing a lot of people kind of really become more and more right wing, say a lot of hateful things, and it was just really hard. And the technology itself, the social media aspect of Facebook, makes it a little difficult for discourse because kind of one post can get a back and forth attention for a long time. So I just started ranting on Twitter. And it was the thing I liked about it was I could write something and it would just, people would not pay attention to it 2 seconds later. And I really liked that, and I also didn't have the same audience there, and so I just kept ranting, and eventually a few people started listening, and that's basically how it got started. Was just this really just kind of verbal diarrhea to get out into the world.
Yeah. What was your assessment of the previous regime
before Musk?
Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, I thought it was horrible back then. I was running an account to that was monitoring anti-Semitism at the time, and just like Facebook and other places, I was extremely upset with how much naked anti-Semitism existed, not to mention all the coded anti-Semitism. And at the time, that was like as bad as I had witnessed. I was very vocal about it, both on my own account and also on this kind of alternate account I was using. And I became, actually kind of an activist at that time. That was kind of actually where a big part of the beginning of my activism around social media. So it kind of started well before Elon Musk, and then once Elon Musk got involved, that evolved very quickly. And I'll also add that I've been very interested in this stuff, both in terms of that work I was doing, but also because I do marketing. And the more I learned about extremism online, and the more I learned about the way extremists in general try to recruit people, the more I started to see it really aligning with marketing tactics in general. And And that both helped me understand it, but also worried me a great deal because I know how effective it can be if done well.
So I mean, and I agree with you. It was definitely not perfect before Musk came in, but there at least were there were at least some kind of guardrails, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There were some, but it was quite badly run.
I think the first time I heard someone float the idea was actually from this guy Darren Beatty, because I remember he went on Bannon or Tucker or something, and he called out Elon Musk. He said Elon Musk should, buy this or do this, and he like challenged him. He's like, be a man, or you're just gonna be like some rich guy or something like that.
Darren Beatty has thought a lot about what Elon Musk should do to save this nation's public discourse. Darren, thanks so much for coming on. What do you think Elon Musk will do? What should he do?
The stakes of who controls the global public square are vastly more than the meager $30 billion that Twitter is allegedly worth. The stakes of who controls the global public square is more important even than an electric car company. And in fact, I would say winning the political battle in the West is just as relevant to the future of human civilization than even space travel.
And I remembered that. We'll get to it later why I bring that up. But just take me through his purchase, what you saw him do, and how long did it take you to figure out your assessment of the guy?
No, I actually, from the beginning of him mentioning the purchase, I was sure it was going to be a disaster. And I was sure he was going to increase the bigotry on the site. And I was sure the moderation was going to tank. I wrote an article very early on about the purchase. I think it was before it happened, like a month or two, and he had kind of floated the idea. And the moment I heard the phrase, there was two things that got my attention. Number one was the phrase free speech absolutist. And then I also had noticed him starting to spread conspiracy theories, and especially a conspiracy theory about George Soros, which to me always sends, alarm bells to my in my head. So first I kind of called out the George Soros thing. Then I wrote a piece that kind of addressed the whole free speech absolutist aspect. At the time, I was convinced he was also a bigot, but I kind of didn't want to focus on that too much because the point of the article is like any time a site or a social media site gets into the whole free speech absolutist territory, that's when neo-Nazis take over. That's when hate starts to spread, because when you remove all moderation, then hateful people can take advantage of the situation and grow an audience very quickly. So that happened on Reddit, that happened on Reddit in the early days. It happened on Twitter even during Gamergate, which was actually why they increased moderation. So these are the places where people become mass shooters or become radicalized and becoming mass shooters. But I think at the time he hadn't fully revealed how kind of unhinged he is. So I think I expected things to get bad. I did not. And I really tried to ring alarm bells, especially as I started to see the anti-Semitism rise and the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in particular. It was that and combined with that, his reinstating neo-Nazis. So kind of that combination, which happened relatively quickly, much quicker than I expected, that really kind of started me becoming more vocal about it.
So what are the big changes Musk makes when he takes over?
So there's a number of things. One was, so there's kind of two sides to this. One is Elon Musk's own voice, and number two is his control of Twitter itself, and what is considered hate speech and all that. So when it comes to his control of Twitter, I would argue that was far more impactful even than his bigotry, because even though he has a massive audience, it's very different to have one massive audience as opposed to kind of a decentralized social media ecosystem used by hundreds of millions of people every day, where you have, both someone like him who's using coded bigotry as opposed to, and then people like Andrew Anglin, who runs Stormfront. He's a open
Daily
neo-Nazi.
Stormer.
Daily Stormer. My apologies. Yeah, Daily Stormer. These are folks that are overtly hateful and bigoted and anti-Semitic. So it became very vocal around that time, or even more vocal, I should say. So that was one of the big things, was when I started to see him kind of openly talking about allowing some people back on. He had like these polls and all that to talk about it. And then also kind of hearing all the stories about, at that time, one of the biggest news stories around the purchase was the fact that he was kind of destroying the moderation. He was destroying the entire company's infrastructure in terms of who was working there. And it was pretty clear that one of the groups he was going to get rid of very quickly was going to be the moderation team. In addition to that, it was also very clear that even if there was a moderation team, he had a very different idea of what constitutes hate speech. For example, he feels like racism, quote unquote, racism against white people, and is, ban worthy, whereas, racism against Black people, some other hateful speech is not considered hateful speech.
Saying the
Transphobia.
word cis is
Right. Exactly. And anything transphobic is, he's himself is saying it all the time. So why would that be against the rules? So, all these things combined, like that alone is a huge, huge deal, and probably impacts things 1,000 times more than his own bigotry.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So first thing he does, he gets rid of the old blue check system.
Yeah.
So it's no longer professors, researchers, reporters, celebrities, athletes with the blue check. It's now literally neo-Nazis, and he lets back just the worst of the worst neo-Nazis. He hasn't let back Nick Fuentes yet. We're going to talk about that later. And then I don't know if you remember, but he, far from being the free speech absolutist, he does ban people right when he comes in. Do you remember who he banned first?
Yeah, I banned some journalists. I'm trying to remember who was the first one.
Chad Loder and Vishal Singh, two journalists that cover like violent neo-Nazis.
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly. And then he also, and that was also kind of under the advisement of, and I don't know how to pronounce his name exactly, but Andy.
No.
I'm sorry?
I think it's Andy No.
Oh, Andy No. I thought you were saying no.
No.
So so he kind of, especially early on, because he would say, oh, this person is Antifa and thus violent and all these things. So, he was getting advised by, a known disinformation hack and racist. So, it was looking bad very quickly. And yeah, I think the blue check aspect of that, of course, made a huge difference as well.
Yeah, he takes over, and I mean, we're going to talk about this in a second in deeper looking at Musk alone, but obviously, listen, there's like people who say he's an idiot. Well, obviously, like to do rocketry, he's not a literal idiot in math and engineering. But, and it's bizarre, he gets Twitter, and who is he like surrounding himself with? Who's he like his board of advisors? It's Cat Turd, account called Cat Turd. Right. Ian Miles Chong,
right?
And
Hi, Raychick,
and it's just this like low rent. I mean, he was just in a Twitter space with. Did you listen to that with Andrew Tate and Alex Jones?
I cannot. I have a very difficult time listening to his voice, so I did not join it.
Well, they were just idiotic, and he would come in and be like, well, I think, Alex, you know more about the WEF.
What do the globalists teach us? children are bad. We're ugly. Humans create, all this racial division. They want us to hate each other, so we just give up, roll over, so the globalists can have the future.
I would just like to say here, the globalists are short-sighted too, because the thing is that you can't really separate yourself from civilization.
Because the black rocks and the globalists are right now in control. They were 100% control. You and others have helped wrest it to maybe they're in 80% control. They're losing control very quickly as people discover what they're doing. But what would you call the debate and discussion about a pro-human future? Just team humanity?
Yeah, team humanity, absolutely.
As they want to misrepresent what Elon Musk or Andrew Tate or Vivek Ramaswamy or any of, I'm telling you, they want us silenced so they can lie about what we said.
Yeah.
Cowards. I mean, wait a minute. Being poor and everybody, wait a minute. General Flynn, hold on a minute. I'm going to call you out right now. Eating bugs, drag queen story time, open borders, World War III. You're saying that's not how you're saying their plan isn't wonderful?
Hey, for a guy that has had to eat bugs, Alex, they don't taste very good. So, yeah.
I'll go one step further. I think we should see a 2v2 MMA duel between Elon and Alex versus Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. I think that'd be the real.
I think Elon should call him out. It'll be bigger than the top UFC fight. If those cowards will show up, my God, it'll be their Waterloo.
I think you guys may have been following what's going on in Davos more than I have, and certainly more than the vast majority of people have. I think most people don't even know that there is a conference in Davos or the World Economic Forum. I've only seen snippets, but some of the snippets are concerning, and I don't think we should have sort of an unelected quasi-governmental organization deciding our future. Who said who made them the boss? Do people even know that they're doing this? I'm not okay with some organization, that I don't vote for controlling, my destiny or that of other people.
It's just like, see, like, what? I don't even know what to make of it. Is he smart? Is he dumb? Is he smart dumb?
I mean, I think it's a number of things. I mean, I think one of them is, I think the blue check thing was interesting because what he essentially did was scaled like a yes man approach to technology, which was the only people who are going to pay for a blue check is someone who is cool with Elon Musk. And probably more likely, it's a very small group of people who bought the blue check, and it's likely, that 90% of them are fanboys of him. So, what he ends up, and one of the technological aspects of that is if you pay for a blue check, your replies are going to go to the top, right? So, for example, when in the first like few months after he bought Twitter, he had not instated the blue check thing, and so there was this tweet that he shared of him kind of in a Batman costume or something. It was like showing Elon Musk as if he was Batman. Someone had put up this image and he shared it. And I wrote something like, oh my, you're such a loser or something like that. And it got like 10,000 likes. So it was like the first results that you would see. And he was getting trolled like constantly because of his behavior. And because at the time there were a lot more people on the site who were against him. So, by instituting this blue check thing where especially because he gets so many replies, all the top replies are all people supporting him, it kind of like reveals his psychology and his approach, where I don't think it's about intelligence exactly as much as like a narcissistic need.
He's like Trump. No,
yeah.
I'm glad you brought up replies. I forgot about that. So he wrecks blue checks, right? And then he wrecks replies, especially like, I bet he totally ruined it for big like left wing accounts because now they have to just scroll past like, Trump supporters.
I mean, they're all dumb. So it's very hard to like when you see a viral tweet, it's always like. It used to be, at the very least, it would be something interesting at the top. Even if you disagreed with it, it would be something engaging because it literally engaged people, right? So like, this is like the opposite. You're just seeing people who are gullible enough to buy a blue check are the ones who are going to the top. So it's really destroyed the like sense of discourse. And I think most people that didn't buy blue check kind of stopped replying or stopped looking at replies. So it's like not a great user experience.
So he bans two journalists that are critical of neo-Nazis, Chad Loder and Vishal Singh. And then he brings back some of the worst Nazis in the world. They're all brought back. Some of them even get blue checks. For me, that was, I was exactly like you. I was like, this is horrible. Totally unrelated mystery though question. Gab, which is the older free, quote unquote, free speech version of Twitter, its usership has gone down by half this year. Elad, do you have any guess why that might be?
I mean, it might have a lot to do with Twitter. I'm not sure, but I could see that being a big part of it. I think for so long, Gab, Truth Social, Parler, there were all these sites that were trying to do what Twitter has done now, which was to have kind of a right-wing mainstream platform. The problem is all those sites tend to fail because people don't want to, the vast majority of people don't want to be in a far-right website. So what Elon Musk did, which I actually think is relatively smart, instead of kind of trying to start from something from scratch, he has the money, or in theory he does, he saw this mainstream social media site that a lot of people on the right use, and so maybe I can hijack this site. I think he had this belief that just this, no matter what, he could hold people captive on the site. And so I think, it's become a big draw for the right. Like a lot of the people who were once on Parler and on Truth Social, are much more likely to use Twitter now. Especially when you take into the fact that not only do the blue checks go to the top of replies, they also have the advantage in the sense that the really popular ones can make money on the site. So it kind of creates this ecosystem where those people want to be there. I don't know if that is what happened to Gab. I'd have to look closer at it, but I could see that being a big part of it.
Parler's gone now. When's the last time you looked at Gab?
I try not to look at it too much.
yeah, me too. Well, I looked at it last week to prepare for our interview, and look at what I found was hilarious. It was every account now has their Twitter.
Okay, yeah.
So they're all gone.
They're
all
sense.
on Twitter.
It makes sense, yeah.
And Musk, when it really got alarming was around, he started doing the Soros stuff. Soros, he said, Soros hates humanity.
You tweeted this thing about George Soros. You said he wants to erode the very fabric of civilization, and Soros hates humanity. Like, when you do something like that, do you think
I think that's true. That's my opinion.
Then he started replying to just outright anti-Semites, including Andrew Torba, the founder of Gab, who's a Nazi. And then, and I was reading your Substack, and you got it right. He was very oblique in tap dancing. So like he would reply to this anti-Semitic thing about Mel Gibson and just be like, "Oh, he's really that buff now," right? So always like plausible deniability. But it really reached a crescendo with ban the ADL. Because, and me and you both noticed this, he was boosting by liking tweets from a just open anti-Semite named Keith Woods from Ireland.
And it's also a neo-Nazi.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. And I also want to ask, what do you make of this theory that Ben Collins reported on that, or do you think Musk knew about the ADL hashtag before it happened?
I could see that. I mean, it's definitely possible because he's like that, but I also think he's very impulsive, and I think so it's impossible to know what he was thinking. But one thing that's very clear is that he joined it in its early stages when it was almost exclusively neo-Nazis and anti-Semites using it. So at the time he joined it, it was an overtly anti-Semitic campaign run by overt anti-Semites. So for me, that was actually the biggest indicator. Obviously, his conspiracy theories were just that, but to me, you know, one of the biggest indicators of anti-Semitic intent is when you actually collaborate with anti-Semites in an anti-Semitic campaign. And that was a big deal. Yeah, I agree, it was a big deal. But the problem was that unfortunately, the way it was reported, because a lot of the media tends to whitewash this stuff for whatever reason, you know, they kind of made it sound like he joined the movement at a later stage. It wasn't necessarily about anti-Semitism, you know, et cetera. They gave him a lot of the benefit of the doubt, and it was just not like that. And, you know, I tried to call out Vox for doing that because they just got the facts wrong. And it's just hard. It's hard to make sure people get their facts right on this stuff.
When he was liking a tweet, and this is the contradiction, he's supposed to be this amazing genius. But then his fans will be like, "Oh, he doesn't know that Keith Woods is a neo-Nazi."
Right.
When he likes his tweets. It's like, so what is he? But eventually he became just overt recently.
But you write in responding to another tweet.
Yes.
This is the actual truth. And it set off a firestorm of criticism all the way to the White House.
Right.
Do you want to explain that thing?
Sure. There was, you know, it's another one of his just replies, you know, but someone basically said, you know, that the Jewish population, Jewish Americans were allowing, you know, kind of this, you know, minorities to come into America, or promoting.
They said, wasn't it dialectical hatred of whites or something like that?
Yeah, it was something like that. And, you know, just basically it was the Great Replacement conspiracy theory where, you know, Jews, this idea that Jews allow or actually try to destroy Western countries and white countries through immigration and through promoting diversity and all these things. And it tends to be something where stuff like, you know, immigration and diversity are seen as existential threats to white countries, white Christian countries, or countries that they see, I should say, as white and Christian. And in that vein, you know, in addition to them seeing these things as existential threats, they also believe there are masterminds who are doing this, which are Jews. I mean, and very often the way it's first presented is not naming Jews, not being too overt about it, but the basic idea is that there's some mastermind behind the scenes, or masterminds behind the scenes, who are trying to destroy you know, Western civilization, which is why when he mentioned George Soros trying to destroy Western civilization, you know, this was something that was not just about Soros. It was conspiracy theories also kind of connected to this larger conspiracy theory. So when he supported that, he said something like it was absolute truth. This was a situation where no longer was he talking about George Soros, no longer was he talking in vague terms. He, you know, responded to someone who's, you know, really overtly named Jews, and that's a very dangerous situation. Besides the fact that it revealed his own anti-Semitism, the more someone goes into overt anti-Semitism, the more likely they are to promote violence, and the more likely people who are listening to them are likely to become radicalized.
And then at the Deal Book Conference, and I like Andrew Ross Sorkin, but he should just read out the tweet that he had agreed with, because he just asked him broadly, and so Musk was able to get. He said, basically, "Oh, I wasn't talking about Jews. I was talking about the ADL."
Well, one of the things that bugged me about that, I wrote a piece about this on MSNBC, and it was basically like, what bugged me about it was he basically repeated the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, but he again kind of coded it. He kind of took a step back, but ultimately he basically said the exact same thing, just in different words. And this to me was what actually upset me about Sorkin's approach, was that, you know, these people, so many people in the media, you know, this is someone in a prominent position. He has been given this, literal stage to interview Elon Musk, one of the most prominent anti-Semites in America, and is completely unprepared for how anti-Semites talk, and what their conspiracy theories are like, and what does it sound like when they are versus not being anti-Semitic. What are the different code words and that kind of thing? What does the conspiracy theory mean? And so he just let Musk kind of say this without any pushback. Most media sites didn't say a word about it. They said he actually apologized, which was nonsense. He did technically say he was sorry. But then he again repeated the same conspiracy theory. So I called that out at the time, and it's unfortunate. It's just very, very hard to make sure these things are handled well.
Yeah, I wonder if he's ever going to just be asked real simply, why do you like tweets from neo-Nazis like Keith Woods, who said X, Y, Z, which is Hitler had won the war? Just simple, direct question. That they always give him these broad questions like, what about anti-Semitism on the planet? And it's so easy to evade. So you wrote a piece in the foreword calling Elon Musk the most dangerous anti-Semite. So let me play devil's advocate. Elon Musk says, most of my friends are Jewish. Now, he is friends with Jews. David Sachs, he goes to dinner with Lex Friedman. His biographer.
Is Lex Friedman Jewish?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, of course, Friedman. He goes out. His biographer was Walter Isaacson. He was part of the PayPal mafia, really, which was about half of it, I think, was like immigrant Jews. So how do you respond to that if he has Jewish friends?
I mean, racists have black friends. Misogynists have women friends are often married. It's not a defense. And if anything, saying that is almost always a sign that someone is anti-Semitic, because it's just not a proper response. Anti-Semitism is not about who you know and who you like. It's about something far larger than that. There is, of course, hatred of Jews, which is like, the most direct and overt form of it. But there's a reason I keep kind of using the word conspiracy theory, and there's also anti-Semitic tropes and coded language and all these things. These are things that in theory someone could believe in without even necessarily hating Jews, or even necessarily know they're talking about Jews. I'm not saying this is the case with Elon Musk, but it is very, very true that this is the case for a lot of people. And ultimately, anti-Semitism has a lot more to do with the effect it has on Jews in the big picture than it has anything to do with, what kind of friends a person has. At the end of the day, Elon Musk has 180 million followers. He controls the rules of a place like Twitter. So however many friends he has is inconsequential relative to the fact that he himself is spreading, something that has been known and it directly endangers Jews. And he's empowering literal neo-Nazis to endanger Jews. So whatever he thinks or feels in that scenario is irrelevant.
Right. It's sort of like if you told me that Henry Ford had Jewish friends. It doesn't matter. It doesn't negate, publishing the international Jew, right?
Yeah, and it's also like, he's done, like, for example, Twitter Spaces with some token Jews, and I think, to kind of like stem his whole, Ben Shapiro, he met with Netanyahu, he went to Israel, all these things. Like, he always does it like a day after he does something anti-Semitic, and it's actually, even that kind of highlights his anti-Semitism, because really what he's doing is kind of trying to separate Jews. And it was very clear once he replied to that hateful tweet about Jews that it's this kind of idea that here are like this small group of Jews that are okay, and then here's this like vast 80% of American Jews are liberal. So even if he was only talking about liberals, which I don't think he is, but even if he was, he's essentially tokenizing the Jews he likes, and endangering the rest. It's not much better, especially once we're talking about, again, neo-Nazis who are very glad to hate all Jews and are becoming empowered by him, so yeah, there's a lot happening there.
Have you heard from anybody that knows him personally?
I don't think so. I mean, I got trolled by Chai Raichik, but I don't think that's the same thing.
First of all, I just commend your bravery for taking on the richest guy on earth. And I get you guys live in the same town, so it's even more awkward.
I don't think we're in the same neighborhood, but
yeah. So you start X out hate because you would think, there are a lot of these ex-Twitter employees, and some of them do speak out. You would think somebody like that, or some big VC person would be with the leading critic of Musk's reign at Twitter, but it was you. So why did you feel the need to step up, and tell me about the campaign?
Sure. So Exile Hate was or is a campaign it's essentially like a letter campaign. We have I think something like 173 signatories at this time, where it's all Jewish leaders of various forms, a lot of rabbis, academics, activists, leaders, that kind of thing, who have signed a letter, an initial letter calling out the danger of Elon Musk's anti-Semitism, as well as calling on advertisers to drop their support, or just to drop their advertising on the site, which is funding the vast majority of the revenue comes from them. So the reason I did it was because I was writing a ton at the time about this. I'd been sharing on Twitter, my stuff was going viral. I wrote that article you mentioned about him being the most dangerous anti-Semite, and these are things that were at that point seen by millions of people, and it felt like it was hardly making a dent. It was making a dent in awareness, but not in like advertising and not in the sense of it. It felt like I was one person, which I kind of realized at a certain point, it's hard to be authoritative about anti-Semitism when you have organizations like the ADL out there, which are listened to more. And so when you're kind of a lone voice, it's just not enough. And so I came up with this idea with my friend that, we really need to like band together and make it very clear that this is something the Jewish community as a whole is very concerned about. And so I reached out to a good amount of leaders on my own. I have enough connection with a lot of them that I was able to kind of get the ball rolling. And then, I kind of recruited a few to help get some others on board. And, it's not that hard to convince Jews that neo-Nazis are not great people and that we need to do something about them. So, I'm really grateful because it made a big impact.
Isn't it bizarre that we're in a world where you're doing what the ADL was supposed to do and they're running ads on Twitter?
Yeah, we're in a backwards world. No one should be relying on me, but it was, yeah, I mean, it's very depressing. It's very depressing. I've been, kind of biting my tongue about the ADL for a long time. They've done, in Greenblatt in particular, I don't want to talk about the ADL as a whole, where he's really just done, this is not a new thing. It's just been years of this kind of approach. And yeah, it's exhausting to watch. And once I started to see how much, I think that was like really the breaking point for me, was when he said that line, and then the next day Greenblatt like thanked him for moderating a different form of what he considered to be hate speech. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to watch.
So here's where we disagree. We have a strategy difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fine if people want to go to Blue Sky, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more effective approach is stay, because what is the source of Musk, his wealth? Okay, there's these government contracts, and that's got to change somehow. And then Tesla. My advice to people is stay on Twitter and tell people like AOC and Elizabeth Warren and Adam Schiff and Ruben Gallego and Senator Merkley, you can tell I looked this up, who all drive Teslas. They all drive Teslas.
Really? AOC drives one?
Yes. If people would pressure these people to publicly sell these cars, Make a big deal of it. And then we can brand Tesla as a right-wing car, because like really the source of Musk's wealth are wealthy white liberals, because they want their Tesla. They love their Tesla. And it's like, if we could get them to be like, oh, I can't be seen in Tesla.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, actually, we're not as far apart as you may think. I mean, I am on Twitter, and so by the way, I had to look it up. AOC has committed to trading in her Tesla for a union-made EV.
Great.
That's good news, because I was about to lose it. But yeah. So when people ask me, like, because I am on Blue Sky and on Threads, and very often people be like, why are you still on Twitter if you're like so vocal about Elon Musk? And I say, to them kind of the same thing, I'll say here, which is that I do support people quitting the platform, just because, partly it's a self-care thing. I don't think most people should be exposing themselves to neo-Nazis constantly. And the other thing is that, it does make an impact to leave. I don't think it makes as much of an impact as people think, but it's helpful. But either way, I don't think it's an activist thing. I think people leave anyway because they hate it. And I think that's something that I would depend on far more than, some relatively negligible amount of people leaving. So my approach has been, this is why I launched X Out Hey, is because I believe very strongly that the way to hit him hard is to hit him in his, in the pocketbook. And I'm kind of more focused on ads, just because I think it's a more direct way to kill the site.
You've done a great job. You've done a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, but the reason I focus on that more than, like, let's say Tesla, is just because, I'm kind of more at the moment just kind of focused on that. But I do think all of this stuff, tarnishing his reputation, making sure people know what he believes, getting the word out, will affect things like Tesla, especially because, like you say, it's liberals that have given him a lot of his wealth. I think also the other thing is that government contracts are a huge part of his wealth, both in terms of, like, how Tesla gets a lot of government contracts, and then also, Starlink and all these things. So he was recently rejected for something like a $900 million deal with the government. And it's likely that it's because of all this behavior, not to mention his behavior with Ukraine. So, so that's, very good. And I agree that his, Tesla needs to be hit hard. That's really the source of his personal wealth. And I think, the government like all these partners of his need to be called out. GM and Ford work with him because they are making a standardized EV charging system with Tesla. There's a lot that can be called out. The initial draft of X Out Hey actually kind of included a very exhaustive list of places that should end doing business with him. But, like, in order to get as many signatories as possible, I tried to just keep it focused. But yeah.
What I'm thinking about now, because he just brought back Alex Jones, he just brought back Kanye West. The first day back, Alex Jones was doing false flag stuff. The first day Kanye is back, he's doing an anti-Semitic rant. And so I think he's going to bring back the Nazi Nick Fuentes soon. And
well, he's back. I mean,
under another name. Yeah.
Right.
I think he's officially might bring him back soon. And I've just been thinking about, boy, I would really like to work with people to get prepared for that day, because like I would just love to go to a local Tesla store with some flyers. This is what you're subsidizing. You see this? See these tweets?
Yeah.
You know who's funding it? You. Yeah, you. Because
like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but nobody in my family is allowed to get a Tesla. And people need to start being annoying and a pain in the ass it's really the rich liberals. If we can change them, right? So maybe we disagree on this. So here's my hot take. Everybody thinks he's a total idiot for buying Twitter. And obviously he overpaid because of the timing. But I don't think it was that. I mean, he's worth over 200 billion. You know, he bought the global town square. I think I think it wasn't that bad of a deal for him. I mean,
Well, I think it was, yeah, I mean, I don't think it was, I've actually been pretty vocal. I think it's like, I think that, it kind of reminds me of how people kind of gloated about Donald Trump being stupid. Like, it's very self-defeating to have that approach because it's just something that makes people feel good.
right.
And it has no actual practical benefit besides lowering your defenses. And I think it's a big problem because I think like when people make, these kind of comments, it's very often like this idea that someone like Musk will inevitably fail. And I don't think that's true. I think that's a very like fantasy-based approach, just like with Trump, that people just thought he would, this prosecutor or that prosecutor was going to save us. That's not how it works. And so, I think I absolutely agree. And I think the other thing is that, even his quote unquote failure, let's say the site completely crashes, everyone leaves, it makes no money, he has to go the company has to go bankrupt. He has still succeeded because his goal has, from the beginning, and he said it himself, was to disrupt activists and journalists, and he has succeeded. This was a place that journalists depended on for live news or on the ground news to share, information. It was a place where activists were able to network in ways that they hadn't before. It was what led to, the Arab Spring. There's so many powerful things that happen on Twitter, and downplaying it is just a massive issue. So I think I absolutely agree, and not only that, I think we need to talk about how he's succeeded. Because he has.
Yeah, and the other, as the kids say, cope, is this thing of Twitter's dying, and people will say this all the time, like, oh, it's sinking ship, it's going to be done soon. The network effects of Twitter are so strong. I am skeptical that Blue Sky doesn't have DMs. It's the classic network effects. Everybody has to be there, right? And when it's like Parler and it's all right wingers, they don't like it. When it's Blue Sky and it's more left wing, people don't have anybody to dunk on. Honestly, I think he could like turn the background of the app to like hot pink, and it would still be the sort of writing town square globally because of the network effects. Do you have any thoughts on
No, I disagree with that. I mean, I think you're right in the short term. I don't think in the big picture that's true because number one, I think there's a big motivation for it not to be, but number two, I think is that people like this is why I was saying that I'm not even concerned with or interested in getting people to quit Twitter, because I actually believe people will quit Twitter no matter what. I almost believe that's more inevitable than anything, because again, this happened with Gamergate. When Gamergate became a huge issue on Twitter, and in particular, the moderation on the site went to crap at the time. A lot happened on the site. One of the major things was the decline of users. That also happened on Reddit. When Reddit had bad moderation, people left. This is a very like kind of established reality of these sites. It doesn't mean they're going to die overnight, but it does mean that people leave, and especially the most active users are the ones who are the least interested in being targeted, because they feel it the most. So it's hard. It's hard for people to leave, especially if you have something like 100,000 followers or whatever, hundreds of thousands. But people are leaving, and I think once we see, I think it's really going to shift. The tide's going to shift if and when more media companies leave. I think that's going to be a big part of it, because it will become less and less influential in the sense of like being a source of truth for a lot of people. So I think the question is more what time frame will advertisers kill the site before users do? But I think it's honestly, I am convinced that the site is going to have an inevitable decline into lack of relevancy. I do think it's going to be hard and it's going to take time, but because of what you're describing, but it's not sustainable.
I got bad news. I'm gonna have to delete this episode because I just saw that Linda Yaccarino, she says Twitter has never been safer. So
yeah, I guess we were wrong.
I guess you're wrong. Well, let's talk about data and metrics. So who has really done well under Musk on Twitter? Let's talk about Jackson, Hinkle, Lucas Gage. Can you tell us about these people?
Yeah, I mean, they've done very well recently. It has a lot to do with the moderation. Also, I would argue has a lot more to do with what's happening in Israel. Because Twitter in general became a massive source of disinformation when October 7th happened and when the war started. Once that happened, it really made the ecosystem very chaotic. It's kind of like things were already bad on Twitter, but once something as massive as that happens and as controversial as that happens, then everything becomes exponentially worse. And so part of that happens to be that very motivated, bad faith bigots are very aware of their ability to propagandize. And so what ended up happening was these accounts that you're mentioning, Hinkle, Lucas Gage, and a bunch of others are white nationalists, and they had a good audience, but then they became believe it or not, they became in theory pro-Palestinian accounts. What they really are propaganda accounts that share a lot of anti-Israel sentiments, a lot of disinformation, but more importantly, they're kind of setting up a situation where they're able to gain. Jackson Hinkle went from 500,000 to 2 million followers in a very short amount of time. Lucas Gage, I think, doubled his audience, something like that. All these people, had massive increases.
And his real name is Angelo John Gage, just
right.
For the
So these are, some of them. Lucas Gage is like not hiding his anti-Semitism. He's very, very out there.
Holocaust denier.
Yeah. But a lot of them are really just kind of waiting for their moment, or they're kind of hinting at things. They'll share this or that. That's more racist, more transphobic, more homophobic, more anti-Semitic. But right now they're kind of biding their time because all they need to do is just keep posting what they're posting, and they're just going to keep growing their audiences. And they can, the thing is that they, unlike, let's say, Palestinian activists, are going to be far less concerned with accuracy. They're going to be far less concerned with legitimacy. All they care about is rage bait. They want to get people upset. Because they know that will increase their followers, and that's literally what's happened.
Yeah. So saying like, "Oh, the hostage women are in love with Hamas," because of the picture, just disgusting. Stuff like that. I want to end with some questions just on anti-Semitism. When you first saw sort of this disgusting sort of anti-Semitism, was it on Twitter mostly?
So the thing that first got me interested in online anti-Semitism was I wrote a very stupid article this was back when I was first Hasidic, like in my early years. And, I was kind of believing in a lot of kind of mystical things about Jews at the time. And I wrote this article that was meant to be kind of like a deeper take on an anti-Semitic trope. And I was trying to say, I wrote something like the title itself was already a disaster. What brought attention to it was something like "Jews Do Control the Media" was the title. And it was kind of this, idea that no, Jews don't actually control the media, but we do have this massive effect on the world spiritually. And so, all this stuff. So the white nationalists, it was published in Times of Israel. So that kind of combination of that title and being in Times of Israel written by a Jew was something white nationalists loved the moment they saw it, because it was like, oh, this Jew has just confirmed everything we believe. And almost immediately I started getting like just a ton of attention. I had no idea at that time how big this community was and how vicious and all these things. And all of a sudden, it was my first time. Now it's like nothing to me, but at the time it was quite shocking, to have, thousands of neo-Nazis reading your stuff and going after you and mentioning you. So I that it just, everything I did also made it worse. Like I asked the people there, can you please take down the article, and all that stuff. And they refused at the time, and they were only willing to make it anonymous or whatever. They gave it a what's it called, a pseudonym. It was like Mendy something. And when that happened, all these people are conspiracy theorists, so that just got them more excited. They're like, oh, look at them, they're covering it up, and it was just like, no, I'm just scared of you neo-Nazis. And anyway, so the point being, like, that exposed me to a lot, because I was looking at my blog analytics and I was seeing, okay, they're coming from Stormfront, they're coming from, here and there. And I would go to these websites and I just saw how active they were. I saw how successful they were at kind of recruiting and all these things. And so that kind of exposed me to that world. But I still very much, this was like a while ago, this was like 2012 or something. So I kind of believed that they were very marginal, that they didn't really, it was probably even 2010. Yeah. So they were very marginal. I just felt, yes, they're very vicious. And at the time I considered them scary, but they're marginal. And then I think this was actually a big reason that I was much more anti-Trump than other Orthodox Jews at the time, was I saw how these people were now becoming mainstream through the alt-right when Donald Trump came on the scene. And I was just in shock, because I was seeing this community that had really traumatized me and scared me at the time, and had used, and still does, by the way, share my article. And I saw them like becoming accepted. And I never would have imagined that at that time. It was the most shocking thing to me to have that thing happen to me that felt, as horrible as it was, felt like a fringe issue. And all I had to do was avoid certain things and not get in trouble again. To suddenly, oh, these people might now be connected to the president of the United States, and their beliefs might now become mainstream. I couldn't believe it. And so once that happened, I started to become obviously very concerned about Donald Trump and all these things. And then combine that with me, starting to learn more about extremism because of my own experience as a Hasidic Jew and leaving Hasidic Judaism, learning about how I got recruited, what were my weaknesses, for lack of a better word, vulnerabilities, I guess, that I had. And just kind of, and learning, and then again, my marketing influence, kind of having all those three kind of come together, I'd say something like 4 years ago, really, really kind of transformed the way I approach this stuff, because I was kind of this combination of tech and knowing these communities intimately and learning about how extremists recruit and succeed, that all these things kind of came together
and now
for me to care about.
And now your time has come. And I'm convinced you're about to blow up. You're going to be a big star. So don't forget us little people when you do, when you're on your book tours and stuff. But yeah, I think people regard you, especially on, it seems demeaning to say on Twitter, as one of the experts, but really Twitter is just the global town square of writing, I sort of think. You are like one of the wisest. I think Ben Lorber, you, a few other people. So I did want to ask you this question. I sent you a thing in your DMs. I looked for anti-Semitic tweets and I found some. There's one where it says "Crikey, look at the nose on this one," and nuke Israel. And then there's one with the mouse with the like herpes and the yarmulke. Why is the anti-Semitism so, it's not just extreme, it's so vicious? Like the cartoons and stuff. Dude, the viciousness for Jews, it's so crazy. What do you make? Why is that?
Well, I think one of the things that's important to remember is that these are very angry, unhappy people. Like I think it can verge sometimes on cliche to say this stuff, but it's really true. I mean, these are people who like are spending hours and hours and hours on the internet just obsessing over stuff, conspiracy theories. And you hear, if you ever have the chance, I would recommend your listeners to, if you have the mental fortitude, to read on Reddit. There's a subreddit called QAnon Casualties, and it's basically like it started as a QAnon thing, but I think it's kind of now just a general far right thing. Basically, it's family members or friends, largely family members of people who have become radicalized into becoming extremist. And again, it kind of started with QAnon and still is very much QAnon based. And you just read these stories, and these people are like not well. And I don't mean that some of them are maybe mentally ill, but like I actually think that it becomes its own mental illness in a sense, because it's like they've become infected. You just see them, like, for example, even if they're not watching the internet, for example, or reading things on the internet, like one of the very common themes is that a lot of these people kind of start with watching Fox News like all the time. It's like on when they have people over, it's on when they're eating dinner, it's on when they go to bed watching it. Like there's something very unhealthy about it, because the ecosystem sucks them in a way. And I've had that experience in my own life, in different moments when I was unwell. And I think like, it doesn't, your brain is not meant to act like that. And I think when you become so obsessive, a lot of things kind of go wrong in your head. And then you add on to the fact that anti-Semitism is not just hate, as I mentioned, it's like a worldview. It's something where you believe that, everything is wrong in the world. Like it's very hopeless. The world is in existential danger. Everything that you know and care about is on the verge or has been completely destroyed because of Black people, Latinos, like immigrants coming into your home and destroying it, all these things. And then so you have this existential despair and anger about your life that has a lot to do with your personal life that's now displaced into this political discussion. And you have a supervillain to focus it on. And I think so when you combine this like unhealthy, hateful inner reality with a supervillain that you hate on top of that, that you can displace all those feelings onto, then you have this kind of twisted reality and way of sharing feelings. And yeah, it's pretty rough when you see it.
I mean, when they make the happy merchant into like a mosquito that is biting the back and blood. I mean, it's wild. So I asked this for a lot of my guests, so I gotta ask you. Let's say if anti-Semitism, we were putting on a scale from 0 to 100, let's say in 2004 it was 24. Okay. What's that number now?
You're saying like in terms of how widespread it is, or in terms of like its danger?
Yeah. Well, yeah. How pervasive, yeah, it is in society.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hard to measure that. I mean, like I think. So I mean, it's very clear, that anti-Semitic incidents are increasing, and also that people are becoming more vocally anti-Semitic in different ways, and that we're seeing like the same network effects you describe are also motivating anti-Semitism. But I think what's interesting is also that one of the most important things is that the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are largely becoming far more mainstream, and these conspiracy theories are not inconsequential. They're based in the Elders
of Zion,
book, which is like the source of a lot of the root source of a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And so we know how dark that can get when people really believe in it. So in that sense, I would say it's vastly increased. And that has kind of allowed the more overt anti-Semitism to become much more mainstream than it ever was. I mean, not ever was, than it has been for a long time.
I'm just gonna gun to your head. What number would you pick?
Well, I wouldn't have started with 24. I'll say that, because I would say,
I
let's say
was just using it as a baseline. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say it started as 5 or something. I would say now we're at 15. I mean, it can get much worse. It's my
Right.
point.
Five is probably better. Yeah, 5 is. Should have done that. So you said
No, it's like, because I was like, I could say 50 in response to what you said, because it, like, in terms of relative numbers, it's
no, you're right.
it's much more, but in terms of hard numbers, I wouldn't
right.
necessarily say that.
You're right. So, by any chance, did you watch or read, or were you aware of Richard Spencer around like 2010?
2010, no. I think it was like 2016 was when I started to get more clued into this stuff.
So this one thing I have, and I'm sort of a researcher. We're both sort of, research. You're a real researcher, but I'm sort of an amateur researcher. One advantage I have on some other people is I came across Richard Spencer online in like 2008. And I basically saw the birth of the alt-right. He started the site, and I'd go and just observe, what are they doing? And he started a site called alternativeright.com. Have you ever heard of this?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
I remember talking about it, yeah.
And one of the first articles they published was by a Jewish guy named Jason Richwine. And the comments were not like, get him out of here and all that stuff. And what I'm getting at is alt-right 1.0. It was like, we're not Nazis. We're not Klansmen. It was like more focused on like race, immigration, IQ stuff. Okay. And if you look at like a Richard Spencer speech from like 2011, he doesn't even mention the word Jew or Hitler or Auschwitz, right? And then by the time we came to 2016, and Nick Fuentes comes around 2017. Now it had evolved into like, they're bored with the racism stuff, and it's all about the anti-Semitism. So here's my theory, and I want your theory about what's going on. Why is anti-Semitism increasing? I think it's partly that Jews are going to be the whipping boy of white Americans' anger and anxiety about demographic change, and the far right has decided to emphasize anti-Semitism as a big tent approach. That's sort of my theory about what's going on. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think there's I agree. I mean, I think, but I also think there's just kind of different motivators in different ways. I think that, for example, people are generally feeling hopeless in America, and lonely, and are becoming more hopeless and lonely, and partly because of real things. Car culture and infrastructure and their inequality. All these things are very much contributing to it, and then combine that with the internet's effect on communication and the way people feel, and bad faith actors who are manipulating them. And I think that, there's kind of this like political part of it, right? Which is like, they're upset about demographics, but why are they upset about demographics? I think matters as well. Besides the fact that they're big, that there's latent racism, or not latent, but there's racism in America that plays a huge part in it. But I think on top of that, why are they becoming radicalized? I think makes a big difference. It's kind of a difference between, a sort of like ongoing racist culture, which is bad enough. You add on, kind of like a Hitlerian anti-Semitism bigotry, and things get much darker. So I think, I think Jews are definitely paying the price, but I also think people need, beyond Jews paying a price, I think it's like people need a sense of meaning in their lives and a sense of, purpose. And I think that America strips a lot of people of purpose and meaning. And I think as the world becomes America becomes much more unequal, and it becomes more clear how, you know, a lot of people are getting stomped on in favor of others. You know, the politicians, leaders, others are going to use use moments like this to find other people to blame, because, you know, we see this with Republicans. They're the ones who are behind so much of this stuff, and they're glad to pass the buck to someone else. It's the only way they can stay in power, and we've seen this in so many places, right? So unfortunately, you know, I think all these things kind of come together in different ways. I think there's different avenues by which people access these things, but ultimately has the same result.
Elad, I gotta let you go, but you're amazing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, if you want to say what people can do on X Out Hate or plug anything, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Jewish leader listening to this, go to xouthate.com, or support it either way. But if you want to sign, you can go to xouthate.org and contact me. Also, you know, follow me on Instagram and Threads. I'm Elad Nehorai, also on Twitter, and on Blue Sky, I'm Elad N. And my Substack is eladnehorai.substack.com. So thank you so much again. It was really great.
Hey, thank you so much, Elad.
Elad Nehorai's writing can be found on his Substack, as well as msnbc.com, and you can find his landmark piece, Elon Musk is America's most dangerous anti-Semite, at forward.com.